So, I just watched my first ever bare knuckle mixed martial arts card. And I gotta say, I was entertained. The theme of "Are you not entertained?" Gladiator. Very relevant. It was very violent. Actually, that's one of the main things that stuck out to me is that's how they market themselves, the most violent show on earth. But the specific bare knuckle MMA promotion, if there's even more than one, I'm speaking of, is the Gamebred Fighting Championship. I watched the GFC 3 card just now, just ended a couple minutes ago, fresh on my mind. And I'm a big MMA fan. You may be aware, so you may see this logo over my shoulder. That's the Beefy Boys Breakdown logo. I have a whole other podcast completely dedicated to the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And for some people who may be thinking, what's the difference between MMA and UFC and this bare knuckle? What's going on here? So, UFC, that's the cream of the crop. That's like the NFL, the NBA, the MLB. That's the top of the top. I guess Bellator fans may argue otherwise, but I think that's most people would agree the UFC is top dog. And then, so the Gamebred Fighting Championship, you may be Gamebred. Have I heard that before? Maybe it sounds familiar to you. Maybe it doesn't. So Gamebred, George Gamebred Masvidal is a famous UFC fighter, allegedly the second biggest draw in the UFC behind Conor McGregor. Has the BMF title, beaten Nate Diaz, has been in there. He's had some losses lately, plenty of losses in career, but that's the thing about mixed martial arts compared to a sport like boxing. In boxing, you take a couple of L's, you're done. Nobody gives a shit. In MMA, all the biggest stars have a ton of losses. Your Conor McGregor's, your Nathan Diaz's, your George Masvidal. So big, huge star in the world of mixed martial arts, George Masvidal. And, I like to see athletes being smart with their money, reinvesting it, not just being that typical story of athletes going broke. I think that narrative's kind of being put to bed as of late. But so George Masvidal, he invested in his own fight promotion. Hence the name Gamebred FC, Gamebred Fighting Championship. It's George Masvidal's own promotion. But there's a lot of promotions out there. Khabib has a promotion. You may be, I've seen the news lately about Eagle FC signing Kevin Lee. So a lot of that's a move fighters are making as fighter pay increases, and I love to see it, honestly. I wish them all success. But with so much competition out there in the space of mixed martial arts, how are you going to stand out? Well, George Masvidal answers that question by taking away the gloves. And it's this weird full circle thing where UFC, believe it or not, I don't know, you may or may not know. I know the old heads know, the hardcores know, but your average MMA fan out there, your newer MMA fan may not even realize that when the UFC started, there were no gloves. So it's almost like fashion, how stuff from the 90s came back around, and ironically, this is stuff from the 90s. Back in 93, 94, they weren't wearing gloves in UFC. So it's like this weird evolution of we're going forward to go backwards, kind of the UFC decided that gloves was more marketable, more palatable, and they went the glove route eventually. But we've cycled full around to going back to no gloves. So it was interesting. It does change the striking. It does change the grappling as well. A lot of people just think, oh, it's going to hurt more. There's going to be more blood. Probably both true. Also puts the fighter's hands in way more jeopardy. And also influences the grappling. That wrist slides under the chin a little bit easier. But yeah, so watch my first bare knuckle MMA Gamebred Fighting Championship card. And I'm not gonna go fight by fight like we do on Beefy Boys Breakdown. It's kind of more general takeaways from just my impression of bare knuckle MMA and the Gamebred Fighting Championship as the show they put on. But yeah, what I think about bare knuckle MMA as a whole compared to MMA with gloves on, it does seem to, I do see the argument that it could kind of regress the sport because like everything's so emphasized that like for example, you're never getting a Max Holloway like 700 strikes thrown against Calvin Kattar without gloves on. So like I think gloves favor like technique. The bare knuckle is more like kind of, it does emphasize obviously chin and ability to take a shot, as well as like a few well placed shots can impact the fight probably more so than if there were gloves on. So it does change it. I said when it comes to the grappling, they can grab hold better. Wrist control is different without gloves. You can, slide that wrist under the chin for guillotine and rear nakeds a little easier without a glove. So it does change, it's like, it's like anything. It's like rugby tackling is different than football tackling without the pads, So like altering the equipment does kind of change the sport. And some of you may be wondering like, oh, I thought bare knuckle fighting's been going on for a minute. Well, bare knuckle boxing in BKFC, which you may have seen on social media or something, it's where they call it bare knuckle fighting championship. I think and they signed former UFC people, so I think they're trying to just play off the name FC. But it's really bare knuckle boxing, but it's really not boxing. And it's like you can clinch more than boxing. Like it's modified boxing, but you can't kick. I don't think you can't elbow, but you can clinch. You can't shoot for takedowns. It's weird. It's kind of a weird rule set, and that's what kind of turned me off for it. For as much emphasis as people want to put on gloves or no gloves, the thing that turned me off of BKFC, kind of the first to dip their toe in the main, I say first, the UFC was the first, but you see this new wave of bare knuckle fighting is the rule set turned me off and just was my point of focus way more so than whether or not they had gloves on. Like you can clinch, but it wasn't quite boxing, but it definitely wasn't MMA, but it wasn't Muay Thai, but I don't know. They almost tried to create a new sport, which I guess kudos to them. That seems like a big bite, like a big endeavor to try to pull off. But, and I don't know if it's like working. I guess it's working to an extent, but I get to that because this Gamebred fighting championship is actual MMA. So there's takedowns, there's elbows, there's knees, there's kicks. And this argument's it's kind of a barbershop MMA fan argument for a long time of, are gloves necessary? Who do they really help? Because for example, if you say it's for safety, then there's no glove for your elbow or glove for your knee or glove for your foot on a head kick. So the argument's always been why the gloves for the hands. Like a hand is less dangerous than a knee or an elbow or a head kick. So it seems like, and most fighters will tell you they prefer the gloves for their own sake, not the guy they're punching, but for themselves. As a guy who's had a couple of boxer's fractures, I can attest to that. The hands break pretty goddamn easy. Not like you see in the movies where you can just punch a million guys a million times and your hands are just A-okay. So most fighters prefer the gloves for their own safety, not the guy they're punching. That's another kind of misconception with the whole glove versus no glove thing. But just gonna dive into some of the notes of things that stood out to me as I was watching my first ever bare knuckle MMA fights. They said I've seen bare knuckle, the BKFC, the bare knuckle boxing. And of course I've seen the Kimbo Slice old fights on YouTube and stuff, but this is something different. And I respect the hell out of George Masvidal for finding his niche. And like I said, it's only the third promotion. And it kind of it's funny, it's GFC 3, but it kind of gives you the vibes of an old UFC 3 clip, from the crowd size to they have I think they were in Biloxi, Mississippi. Joe Rogan, for those people that watch Joe Rogan out there, you've heard him tell the story of the Dothan, Alabama show a million times. So back when it's bare knuckle MMA is where the UFC was. It's like a time portal from just the crowd size to the quality of the athletes to the strategies. It really is a throwback in a lot of ways. But yeah, so it's George Masvidal's promotion, which I think is just dope. You you'll never, like, it's almost kind of the equivalent of how NBA players, like I think Dwayne Wade's a part owner of the Jazz. So you're starting to see this new wave of athlete kind of getting into the business as opposed to being a pawn of the business. And I like that just on so many different fronts, you know. So I wish George Masvidal all the success in the world. This is Holly, my multi-poo. She decided to drop in on the show. That was her scratching at the door earlier, in case you heard that. But yeah, so the thing with any lower quality, lower echelon kind of promotion, the first thing you're gonna look for is like, what's the talent level here, right? It's like when you're watching a D2 bowl game or and this is coming from a guy that played NAIA football, it's different than watching Florida State, Oklahoma, or schools like that, it's just like it is. So the first thing you look for is like, what are the caliber of these fighters? What's their records? What's their skill sets? What's their conditioning set? Like, what's the eye test telling you? And I gotta say, that's probably the most disappointing part was just kind of the level of fighter. It had nothing to do with whether or not they had gloves on or the rule set. They just didn't have that good of guys in there, so they wouldn't have made any rule set necessarily shine, if you get what I'm saying. So that was a little alarming. Like, for example, the first fight of the night, which, lower end of the card, I feel you. Even the UFC, they don't have their top fighters at the bottom of the card. But, like, this guy was making his allegedly, like, pro debut, and I guess that's not. But, like, this guy's not a professional fighter, you see. That's when the guy's making their pro debut, that means as of yesterday, they were not a professional fighter. And this guy, I mean, he was fat. He was out of shape. No, and it wasn't one of those sneaky fat guys like a Justin Tafa or, you know what I'm saying, like a Tai Tuivasa. Like, no, like he was just like a fat, untrained just guy. Like people say Sean O'Malley fights cans. The cannery going on this card was a little alarming. There was some cannery. Some straight tuna fish cans out there fighting. I gotta say, there was also some not cans like that. But that's the problem when you match a guy that's a can versus actually like a real cat. Like, you gotta kind of question the competitive spirit of the matchup and why we're all here. But kudos to those men for putting it on the line. Let me see here. But yeah, this guy's name was Connor McKenna. I think he got a broken orbital out of the deal. Like, he just wasn't qualified to be in really any octagon or, ring or just any combat sport. He wasn't qualified. He was essentially just like a guy. And yeah, so he lost his fight. He got worked. They said the guy he was fighting looked great, but question the level of competition. Let me see. I mean, there's always the funny stuff when you watch the smaller promotions, whether it's Gamebred or any other smaller promotion, like some of the sponsors. Like, one of the big sponsors was like some rap label of a button. I've never heard of the label. I've never heard of any of the artists signed to the label. But it was kind of a cool concept. They were talking about how they were the first label to pay their artists in crypto. And like, I don't know. Maybe some money laundering was going on. I'm not quite sure. I'm not going to speak on that, but it was just But that's any smaller promotion. You got to get the sponsors you can. Even the UFC has goofy sponsors to this day. So, but it was funny. Just like this, like random like rap label was like sponsoring the promotion. So that was pretty funny. Actually, another thing you look for in these smaller promotions is the commentary is usually super weak. I gotta say, I didn't write these guys' names down. They did a great job. Maybe not a great job, but they did a pretty good job. Like, they did a good enough job to where I could enjoy the fights and I wasn't like annoyed. Like, we've all seen it, like had our dads like watch the football game on mute because the commentators are pissing them off or annoying them or whatever. And that can happen with the smaller time like MMA promotions. And I got to say, this was not that. These guys did a pretty good job. George Masvidal joined them on the broadcast, which I thought was cool. He had a little mic trouble. There was some technical difficulties, like halfway through the co-main event, the kind of broadcast feed like went out. And but I mean, like I said, these smaller promotions, it was George Masvidal's third time putting on a show. These things will iron them out, the logistics, the technical aspects, the filling out the depth of the roster. These things will come in time. So, I'm not crucifying it, but I'm also, here to provide my fair, my interpretation of my first GFC, my first bare knuckle MMA card. So, like I said, all the problem, the UFC, I'm sure had similar problems way back in the day. So, it's a fledgling promotion. Like I said, it's their third fight. And so all the things that come with that came with this. But like I said, I'm not giving them a pass, and I'm also not burying them for it. It's almost like to be expected. I'm sure they're working with a smaller budget than compared to, a one championship of the UFC or a Bellator. So, working with what they got, they did a fantastic job. Like I said, the guys on the broadcast did a solid job. They weren't a distraction. The obvious stuff, the damage comes quicker, without the gloves. I think every fight ended in the first round but one. So that's an obvious, jumps off the screen, jumps off the page at you, difference of, if you were just making, a quick summary of what's different without the gloves in MMA. Now, if you go back and watch the old UFC fights, there was plenty of fights without gloves that went a long distance. And there was one fight that went 3 rounds on this card, surprisingly by heavyweights. And you can't paint with too broad a stroke, but painting with the broad stroke, a lot of early finishes, a lot of damage, but there was also a lot of guys that weren't in shape and stuff, so you got to factor that in. So, a lot of early fights, a lot of fast fights, a lot of first round finishes, take that how you will. I'll take bare knuckle MMA over the bare knuckle boxing or the BKFC model, what Paige Van Sant does any day. It's so much better with the takedowns and the knees and the kicks. And the smartest, best fighters on the card were actually, not throwing that many hands. Because like I said, you'll break your hands pretty quick. So the most skilled guys were throwing a lot of kicks, a lot of knees, a lot of elbows. So that when you see a high, that's why I want to see higher level guys in the promotion, because then you will see these rules actually on display. Some of these guys, these cans on the card, just like I said, they didn't do any rule set justice. Let me see here. One thing George Masvidal understands greatly is the marketing side of MMA, and he's giving these fighters opportunities. Each fighter gets their own little interview promo thing, essentially. Even the undercard, every single fighter on the card, some of them didn't know what to do with the opportunity. Some of them were awkward as all hell or had the personality of this beer glass, but some of them did, and it was cool. It was cool to see the difference of guys that knew they had the camera on them versus guys that were oh, I'm here to fight. I don't know what to say. But I shout out to George Masvidal for understanding the marketing side of MMA and giving these lesser known fighters a platform. Some of which took the opportunity and ran with it. Many of which didn't, but that's on them. George provided a dope platform for these fighters, and cheers to that, George. So with the grappling, it's did the hand slide under the chin easier, or were these guys out of shape and giving up their neck, or did these guys have lower level grappling defense? So like I said, I want to see some high level guys do no glove MMA fights. So we'll really see these rules kind of get pushed to their limits and really see the differences more than these kind of guys. A name some of you may recognize, Anthony Njokuani. He's fought in the UFC. He's fought in one championship. He's a veteran, very salty record, but he's fought on some bigger promotions. And he was a guy, his skill set was, head and shoulders above a lot of the other fighters on this card. So, he performed well. He got the win. He was the guy throwing a lot of kicks, a lot of knees, a lot of elbows. He was really saving his hands, and he articulated that after the fight. It was his first bare knuckle fight, but he's had 30 kickboxing matches, 30 gloved MMA fights. So veteran fighter, but it was his first fight without gloves, and you can tell that he was throwing a lot of kicks. He was rarely using his hands. Still got the knockout win. He was probably one of the higher level guys on the card. He said a lot of cans on the card. Let me see. Yeah. And then the last takeaway, there was like a heavyweight, Darian Abbey. His fight was the only fight to go 3 rounds. He was 6'6", but he was like fighting with technique. Like almost all these other fights, like Njokuani fought with great technique. Almost every other fight on the card could have been in the back of like a Buffalo Wild Wings or something, essentially, like just calling a spade. But man, this Darian Abbey guy was like very precise. I mean, he was a little wild. He did like a bunch of flying knees, but even the flying knees were like a guy who knew how to throw a flying knee. But instead of 6'6" heavyweight, he was moving around. He was using the length. He was staying on the outside. Now, the guy he was fighting, Kansas City. So, once again, I don't know what to do with the data that I got. But, and on top of that, he probably showed the most personality out of all the fighters. Gamebred, once again, understanding the marketing side of MMA, brought the other heavyweight that looked good and wasn't a can on the card, and he brought him in the cage with the guy who won the main event and had an in-cage stare down. Like, Gamebred knows that part of the game, and that part of that's probably the best part of the show. So, and the fighters that knew what to do with the platform was also great to watch as well. But there was a lot of guys that they didn't deserve to be on this card or any other card, really, for that matter. I understand, like, you got to start somewhere as a fighter and you got to start somewhere as a promotion. So, but I can't wait. Like I said, I had an overall positive interpretation of my experience. I said technical difficulties aside and just, cans aside, I still enjoyed the show. It was a slow sports night. It gave this fight fan something to watch. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I like what George Masvidal is doing with the GFC. He's doing great things. And I think it'll get better with time. Like I said, any criticism I gave about the card, like all are things that can be ironed out with time. The roster will gain depth with time. The the technical difficulties will get ironed out. All of those things, like those minor complaints I had, will get ironed out with time. And if any man's the guy to do it, it's George Masvidal. But yeah, like this video, share it. Go check out a GFC fight the next time they put on a card. Like I said, I was thoroughly entertained. If you like fights, if you like MMA, check out my UFC podcast, Beefy Boys Breakdown, on YouTube. Also at Beefy Breakdown on Twitter. DM us. We love to interact with viewers. At Dreadful Talk Dom on Twitter, at Dreadful Talk Dom on Instagram, and follow Dreadful Talk on YouTube as well. I appreciate it, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great day. Whenever you're watching this, enjoy your time here.